Right, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's well. We're starting this one a little bit early today. This is actually currently live at the moment. We're going to go back to the beginning as it was very interesting. I thought you deserve to see this, so let's hopefully get this one rolling. And I think we're going now. So let's go over. So this is London Assembly, the police committee. We're getting questions about recent events. So we'll go over to that now.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee? Before we start, I'd like to say on behalf of the London Assembly Police and Crime Committee that we were absolutely appalled to see the shocking arson attack on 4 ambulances in North London over the weekend belonging to a Jewish community service. This committee stands against all forms of hate, and our thoughts are very much with the local community at this time and all Jewish people across London. This morning, we'll be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime. Please could you make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Assembly Member Desai, and Assembly Member Russell will be joining the meeting as an observer later today.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of February 2026 to be signed by me as a correct record? Can we note the ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent and received? We now move on to our main item of business, and I'd like to welcome our guests, Kaya Comer-Schwartz, who is the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and Kenny Bowie, who is the Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight at MOPAC. Welcome both. So I'll start. So our first topic is about stop and search. My apologies. Thank you, Clark. So we will start with the awful events regarding the attacks on the ambulance. Deputy Mayor, if you'd like to make a statement, and then we will be asking questions for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. As the Mayor stated yesterday, the attack yesterday on 4 Hetzler ambulances was a cowardly attack on the Jewish community. Hetzler are a charity whose sole mission is to protect life, both Jewish and non-Jewish life alike. The Community Security Trust, Hatzalah and Shomrin are all staffed by volunteers who protect and serve the community day and night. Thankfully, there were no reported physical injuries. I visited the scene yesterday morning, and the Mayor and I remain in close contact with the London Fire Brigade and the Metropolitan Police Service. Officers remain on scene, and the arson attack is being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. The incident has not been declared a terrorist incident at this stage, but counter-terror police are now leading the investigation. Anti-Semitism and hate crimes of all forms have no place in our society. It is important that we all stand together at moments like this. This attack comes at a time where fears are already heightened given the global events and recent attacks targeting Jewish Londoners. Jewish Londoners are understandably scared. I've spoken to many members of the Jewish community who are fearing expressing their faith publicly, which cannot be the case. Londoners should never be cowed by this kind of hatred or intimidation. Those who seek to divide us shall not win. My thoughts are with the whole London Jewish community, who must understandably be worried and concerned. We know that hate crime comes in many forms, and the Mayor and I are continually determined to work closely with the police and community leaders to ensure our communities feel safe and are safe to be going about their daily lives. Patrols have been stepped up in Golders Green and beyond, and I would urge anyone with information to please come forward or contact Crime Stoppers anonymously. There is no honour in staying silent. MOPAC has a strong and long-standing relationship with the Community Security Trust. We want to support local communities across London to tackle anti-Semitism and hate crimes of all forms. We'll continue to work closely with them to ensure we get rid of this kind of hatred from our city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, before we go to questions, would you mind just moving the microphone a little bit closer so that everyone at home can hear your response as well? Thank you. I have my first question to you is about the local community and reassurance to the London's Jewish communities. What is being done to ensure that people feel safe?
As I've previously stated, we were in contact with the London Fire Brigade and the Metropolitan Police throughout yesterday, and we know that over at least the next 4 weeks, the Metropolitan Police Service will be stepping up their patrols and reassurance within the Jewish community and working closely with them and having regular contact with them, as will myself and the Mayor.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It is shocking, and I've also spoken to many friends from the Jewish faith, and of course they're all saying exactly the same, and I'll say it to you as well. For a couple of years now, we have had lots of protests with people screaming from the river to the sea, calling for an intifada. The anti-Semitism has been rife, and nobody has done anything about that. It is clear, and it is getting worse and worse, and has got worse and worse. The Jewish community are sick to death of we'll put in more police officers on the streets. We're with you. We stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Well, if they did, then perhaps they'd stop all this anti-Semitism that we see on our streets every single week. We should be looking after our Jewish community, and we're not. So what do you say about all this anti-Semitism we see every week at these protests? Blatant hate crime, blatant, and they get away with it. And it emboldens people like whoever it was, whatever vile creatures did that to that wonderful place. And I've visited there before, staffed by volunteers. It's an incredible service. And they don't just look after Jewish people, they look after the whole community. And of course, anybody doing that has been emboldened because all these other people every single week carry out anti-Semitic gestures on our streets and they get away with it. What are your views on this?
The Mayor and myself have unequivocally said that anti-Semitism of any form must be tackled and should be treated rightly as a hate crime. We work closely with CST, the Community Security Trust. MOPAC has a long-term relationships with CST to ensure that we work to protect particularly sites of faith of all faith. The Mayor has repeatedly said that people should be mindful of their language on protests. It's important that people recognise the impact that they are having on the wider community when hate speech is used.
Deputy Mayor, the Mayor has actually said that saying from the river to the sea is not anti-Semitic. He's actually said that in this place here.
I believe that was a point about the importance of wider context. However, what I will continue on with saying, Chair, is that only this December did the Commissioner say that they'll go even further, calling out the Intifada and making sure, as they have throughout this, that whilst protest is important as a cornerstone of our democracy, that they will continue to do all they can to protect Jewish Londoners and people of all forms, and they tackle hate crime and have made many arrests on that basis.
Can we not talk about other religions? We're just talking about the Jewish community at this point. And everybody is saying it's two-tier policing, and you can see why. When you allow people to constantly call from the river to the sea, call for Intifada, nothing's done, and then when something ghastly happens like this, well, we're standing shoulder to shoulder with you. No, you're not actually, because we're not protecting our Jewish community as we should.
The Mayor has repeatedly invested literally millions of pounds to make sure that he's tackling extremist views of all kinds, including anti-Semitism. I know we'll be coming on to speak about this later, but through the Shared Endeavour Fund, he has prioritised making sure that we tackle and have conversations, especially about anti-Semitism, and that's been globally and recognised as good practice. The Mayor has also put in millions of pounds into the work that he's done to support community cohesion. I don't think it's right to say that one form of hate is different to another. We must tackle all forms of hate so that we can have a society that doesn't divide people.
He should be calling this out more than he does.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Duval, did I see your hand? No. Apologies, mate. Any other questions? Assembly Member Wilson.
Excuse me. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. And in a similar vein to what Assembly Member Hall has asked, we see. I know we're going to talk about protest a bit later on, so I don't want to spend too much time referring to that now. But just to recognise, and I think it would be helpful if you or the Mayor would recognise. So I'm asking you to recognise. Do you see a direct connection between when we have those events, those protests, where people are calling for death, 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 the IDF, or river to the sea, globalise the Intifada, those kind of things. They are inciting violence, and we'll talk later on about whether we think in that context they're doing enough to tackle that. But surely you must be able to see there is a direct connection between allowing a culture of that virulent anti-Semitism and incitement to fester. Is it any wonder when people then follow up on that and carry out an act of violence on this scale? Do you see that connection?
Assembly Member Wilson, I think trying to speak to the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor about understanding the importance of tackling hate crime is a strange thing to do. I recognise how important words are. It's part of the reason that I'm so passionate about the work we do to tackle hate crimes of all forms and bring together society. It's really important at this time that we recognise that the global events are having a particular impact on the Jewish community, as they are on many communities across London, and we must do all that we can to stand together and tackle hate of all forms.
That's the same word salad we come to expect, I'm afraid. It's not answering the direct question. I asked a direct question, a yes or no. Do you see that connection? I feel like I'm not going to get an answer to that. So if I may just ask a second question quickly, and that is, what further information do we have, or are you able to release about the suspected perpetrators of this. There is a group that has claimed responsibility. Do we know whether they are genuinely behind it? And do we know anything about... all I can see is what's speculated online in the media. I'd like some concrete facts. Do we believe there's a connection between that group and the IRGC? And if so, would the prescription of the IRGC, which something bizarrely the government is failing to do, would that make it easier to prevent and tackle this kind of thing happening again?
This is a live investigation, so it'd be wrong of me to comment on that. The police are doing all they can to look into the events of yesterday, and counter-terrorism has now taken over this investigation, which I think really points out the significance of this investigation.
It's a live investigation and things will change, but at a point where that information can be made available, even if not necessarily publicly, but could a confidential briefing be arranged for members so we can have a real understanding of what's going on here?
The police have been actively updating when and if they can on this.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbett.
Thank you. I am really concerned with some of the tone of the discussion here, because we're all saying that we agree and care about the Jewish community, yet the tone and the way that you've been questioned, I think, has been really inappropriate. If we all agree that we support and, what we've seen around the Jewish community, like I know the Hetzola and the other services from Hackney, and I spend a lot of time with them, and I know they do some incredible work for, like you've described, the Jewish community and everyone, keeping everyone safe. And I am really worried about what we continue to see in politics around this conflation of people protesting against a genocide of anti-Semitism, which absolutely is hateful and has no place in our society. But we cannot continue as politicians to conflate those two things. I wanted to just ask what the conversations have been with government around this, like what support the mayor's calling for, from what change we need to see in terms of addressing anti-Semitism from a kind of more national level, or the support that the mayor's called for any of the programmes that you mentioned that are happening in London.
Yes, obviously, we've been in regular contact with the Home Office about the security of all sites of worship. We've also been talking to them regularly about the work that we do through the Shared Endeavour Fund and what we've learnt from that. I chair the Contest Board, which is the board that looks at London's approach to counter-terrorism. So we have regular discussions about what more we can do, both in prevention, but also in preparedness to protect London.
And what are the main things that's come out of the Shared Endeavour Fund? Are there any kind of key highlights of things that have worked?
We're going to be coming on to that later. Is that okay if I...
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can't see any other questions. Deputy Mayor, thank you very much and for your statement at the beginning of this section. We're now moving on to questions for our regular monthly catch-up with the Deputy Mayor and MOPAC. The first issue is about Stop and Search. My questions are first. So earlier this month, MOPAC released a report that found that black people are up to 48 times more likely than white people to be stopped and searched by police in some areas of London. What is MOPAC's assessment of why disproportionality in stop and search remains so persistent?
Thank you, Chair. You're referring to the piece of research that MOPAC did with the King's College London, which, just to lay out the significance of this research, analysed every stop and search conducted by the Met in 2023. So that's over 150,000 records and over 17 million words. To go to your question, it found that one of the most significant thing was that the grounds used to justify stop and searches for black Londoners were vaguer than those used for white Londoners. As you said, it also identified 24 wards where the levels of disproportionality were more acute.
Thank you. How is MOPAC rebuilding trust with communities most affected by stop and search disproportionately, including black and disabled Londoners?
Thank you. The committee will know, because we've spoken about this previously, that the work we do through the public attitude survey is a key part of our understanding of the trust and confidence of Londoners. It's important that we know that obviously there are some members of the community that have less trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police Service than others. This tends to be members who are of black backgrounds, but also we recognise the LGBT community and the disabled community as well. This research is important in this because we know that one of the key tools of the Metropolitan Police Service is stop and search, and that we haven't nailed, therefore we have a deeper understanding, a granular understanding of how stop and search is being enacted. I think what's really important to say is we also know from the research that we've done in MOPAC that conducted correctly, justly, well, a high quality stop and search doesn't have an impact on people's trust and confidence in the police. However, where it is conducted badly or unjustly, it can we've seen the data that it can have a profound impact on trust and confidence, which is why we wanted to do this research, so that we could look at how we could tackle the disproportionality and support the police to do that, so that we can raise trust and confidence within the police force.
Can you tell us how BCU commanders are held accountable where disproportionality is particularly high? And how is MOPAC ensuring that targeted oversight takes place in these areas?
Thank you. We obviously have identified 24 areas, and you will have seen in the data that there's levels of acuteness within that. We've committed to running this data exercise annually, so we can have a real granular look at whether there's improvement in the disproportionality or not. We believe that it can be reduced. We continue to talk to the Metropolitan Police Service about how they will use this data to take that work forward. Kenny, is there anything?
So I think that's the real advantage of this work. Nothing has ever been done on this scale or this level of sophistication before. So I think what you're talking about there, Chair, is one of the big opportunities, both for us and for the Metropolitan Police. I think there's probably 3 levels to that. So if you start looking at how our BCU commanders held to account, well, primarily you want them to be held to account by the communities that they serve. So by making these tools available through the Community Scrutiny Transformation Programme and bringing on more and more diverse volunteers, and again we talked about this with Assembly Member Lord Bailey at the last session of this, that is something where actually you can start looking at whether the grounds are stronger or weaker, depending on whether it's white or black Londoners. You can start honing in on whether there are actually individual wards where the levels of stop and search are disproportionately more than the model would estimate based on wider socio-economic factors. From a Metropolitan Police perspective, if you look at what Deputy Commissioner Matt Duke said at one of the LPB committees, he talked about the fact that this would allow them to get down to a much more granular level than they've ever done before, really understand the areas where they need to look at this, and actually never mind speaking to BCU commanders, you can speak to local inspectors and understand what's happening down at that incredibly local level, which I think is the first time, well, I know it's the first time, that we've ever really been able to get to that level of granularity. Now, at the moment, this is 2023 data. We're updating it for 2024, and then we'll get to 2025, and there will always be a bit of a lag with that because it will always require some of the economic data to come through. But that is really helpful. And then from us, from our perspective, I think this just allows us to really have a much more sophisticated conversation rather than just saying, well, it's X versus Y, it's this versus that. You can actually sort of say now, well, we know that, for example, in East Sheen and Dulwich, here were the actual levels of disproportionate diversity estimated. What are you doing in those areas? And equally, you can start saying, well, we know the areas where the grounds for stop and search were much vaguer, were stuff around stolen property, blades, pointed weapons. Where was that happening in London? And actually start being a bit more sophisticated in the way that we speak to the Met about all of that stuff. So I think there's loads of really, really great opportunities which come off the back of this. And the Met have been really positive about this and do see this as something which is going to be really helpful to them in helping to drive that. So I would hope this is going to lead to quite a big change in the way that oversight and accountability model works.
Okay, thank you. Finally, we've just seen a period of record low homicide rates with reductions to robbery, theft and violence with injury. How will you be able to ensure that the positive momentum in the past year won't be compromised by any potential changes to stop and search?
Thank you. Yes, you're right. We've seen violence with injury down 13%, burglary down 30%, and homicide down 20%. We've also seen theft from person fall 20%. I think one of the key things that we've done working with the Metropolitan Police is talk to them about their stop and search charter, the work that they've done, which has been, they talk about it as a reset on stop and search. They've given that work, they've done that work co-produced with local community stakeholders and had a blank page approach in making sure they understand what matters to people in stop and search, and enabled by doing that and the 34 recommendations that they're working through to deliver on the back of that, they're hoping to make sure that they can use stop and search ethically, proportionately, to make sure they continue to tackle things like weapons and drugs off the streets.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. How are you going to make sure? So let me go another way. There seems to be an emphasis on this report on conclusion. So what came of that stop and search? How do you calculate for the fact that stop and search has a preventative element? So I used to deal with gang-involved boys. They used to carry weapons around. The only reason they wouldn't carry a weapon was because they wondered if they'd be stopped and searched. So how do you weight the idea that nothing has come from it, but the positive effects it might have had because it sends a message that the police are looking for weapons? Deputy Mayor, let's start with the Mayor. Deputy Mayor.
I think that goes back to the point about the quality of the stop and search and the quality of the engagement of the stop and search. Obviously, the research has found that vaguer grounds are used than on black Londoners disproportionately to white Londoners, but it's through improving the quality of the stop and search that the hope would be that it's actually an opportunity to have a positive interaction with a young person in exactly as you say, about making sure that they can have a positive conversation about concerns about knife crime or otherwise.
I don't think it's about that. I think it's about the prevalence. It's about how likely am I to get stopped. If I am carrying a weapon, how likely am I to come across the police? It isn't about a positive interaction. If you're someone who's thinking of carrying a knife, I think you're beyond that positive interaction. Go ahead, Kenny.
Sorry, can I just...
Yeah, of course.
I think the work we've done with the Violence Reduction Unit and our work on violence and exploitation support services shows that a young person is never beyond support and help, and we should take all of the important moments that we can to have conversations with young people about making sure that their safety is paramount.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. If you reduce the amount of young people you talk to because you're looking for stop and search to always give you something, you will reduce the likelihood that you come across a young person who's made a decision to carry a blade, hammer, whatever they're carrying. And I'm a little bit worried that the direction of travel on this is to always say stop and search is wrong unless it generates something. And I just want you to give me a reassurance that's not what's happening.
No, it's not what's happening. This is about making sure that stop and search can be used as a tool that is high quality, proportionate, effective, and not unfairly, disproportionately treating black Londoners differently to white Londoners.
Yeah, so Assembly Lord Bailey, so a couple of things I would say. One, this report certainly shouldn't be seen as anything which is anti-stop and search. Stop and search is a vital tool for the Met. It does take weapons, it does take
Glad to hear that. Thank
blades,
you.
etc. off the street. In no way are we diluting that or saying that that's not the case. That is 100% the case. What this report does say is that what we would like to see is the grounds for those stop and search equalised so that black Londoners get the same levels as white Londoners. And that's not to say whether there should be more or less stop and search in London. That's simply to say that if there is going to be stop and search, we think that it should be the same quality of grounds.
Let me ask you, I certainly agree on the quality point, but let me ask you this then. It is a reality that black Londoners have been much more the victims and the perpetrators of knife crime. If you equal things up, does that expose us to more knife crime? Or are you going to take into account the impact that you have in certain things? Knife crime has a devastating impact on the community. The police have been able to interrupt a lot of that through stop and search. If you change their proportions on the back of political need, would that expose the black community to more danger?
So it is right that black Londoners are statistically more likely to be both victims of knife crime and the offenders of knife crime. So that's correct. I don't think ensuring that the quality of the grounds that Londoners get when there is a stop and search conducted against them should change.
No, but if you change the because you've got a very vague term in here that they weren't right. I forget the term you used, but if you do something with that, then you will change the number of black people who are stopped. Are we worried that that will change the number of black people who are affected by knife crime? Because let's be clear, the single greatest disproportion in the purview of the Met Police is the amount of black Londoners who are murdered. And if a little disproportionality on stop and search is going to keep that in check, that'll do much more for improving the relationship with the police than any stop and search chart ever will.
So I think we're violently agreeing here and perhaps talking at slight cross purposes. So Matt, we are saying that we do agree with stop and search. What this said was that if you looked at the weakest grounds of searches according to the model, which we did, and you just removed them as a whole, that would have reduced overall disproportionality in the rates of stop and search. But we're not saying that's a sensible idea. We are saying what would be a much better idea would be for those grounds to actually be stronger.
Yeah, but the point is I'm making, and I come to you now, Deputy Mayor, if you change those grounds, make them stronger, to use your parlance, you then risk, I would imagine, less black people being stopped, particularly black men. Does that put, I'm asking you directly, Deputy Mayor, does that put the black community, young black men, at greater risk?
No.
Why not?
Partly because the data shows that actually where there's been higher quality stop and searches, there's been more positive outcomes in terms of crime. So that's part of the picture. But also the data also looks at what are, it doesn't mean that, for example, some areas where there are more black people that residing, that those have a higher disproportionality in terms of stop and search than other areas. What we're looking at is the disproportionality, and we've noted that in 24 areas, when controlling for social and economic factors still, so that wouldn't alleviate the amount of people in that area, there are more acute disproportionality in stop and searches, and that's what needs to be unpacked now.
But are you tracking that against crime outcomes? Are there more knife attacks in that area, more people going to custody? Is that the case?
Yeah.
The case? Because what you said in the middle doesn't seem to make any sense, because you talked about less and then more. And my point is, I'm just a little bit worried that in the rush to look politically correct, we remove one of the protective factors for the black community. And I say this as a plea. We talk here now about rebuilding trust. The single biggest thing about rebuilding trust is our black children not getting murdered. And stop and search and interfering with that needs to be done very delicately, because if it does, we will have dead teenagers on our hand, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, and what I would say about that, Assemblymember Bailey, is I don't think anybody wants any stops and search which aren't justified or where the grounds aren't reasonable. And if you look at what HMICFRS found over roughly the same period as our research did, they found that 94.6% of the Met stops based on a very small number of actual records, I have to say, but they found that those weren't justified stops. That would equate to some sort of 8,000 odd stops which should be taken out. So I don't think there's a direct correlation there. I'm very happy to come and speak to you in much more detail about all of this sort of work outside if you'd find that helpful.
I would too. I'm going to go back to the chair because there's a lot of questions to come.
Thank you. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. Good morning, Kenny. Black Londoners are up to 48 times more likely to be stopped and searched. And given these statistics, how do you expect Black Londoners to have confidence and trust in the Met?
I think this is why this research is so important, because it enables us to really take a look at this picture and be able to directly challenge and ask the Metropolitan Police how they are going to tackle it. That's why we've committed to running this data annually to understand whether the dial is moving positively or not in this. And as I've stated previously, we'll be working with the Metropolitan Police Service to continue their work on the Stop and Search Charter, but also, and as Kenny mentioned, we continue to roll out our community scrutiny panels, which will put the hands of scrutiny into local areas, and hopefully they can use this research to really challenge what's happening in their areas, because this really is about improving trust and confidence, making sure that the police understand what's happening and are able to work with Londoners to get into better relationships through conversation, as they have in areas where the community scrutiny panel is already in existence. And we, as I said previously, we know that where a stop and search has been done with a high quality thing, that doesn't affect trust and confidence. However, we know if poorly enacted, that it does. So this is really important data in that arsenal of improving things for Black Londoners.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We heard in that previous interaction about the positive effects of stop and search. I just want to raise that there obviously can be very negative effects of stop and search as well. A lot of young black men in London will be stopped by the police for the first time at 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old. It's a very formative experience for most young black Londoners who are just on their way to school or worrying about their maths homework. It can feel quite dehumanising, and it can feel as if you've done something wrong. It can be embarrassing. You're seeing members of the public walking past while you're being questioned by the police having done nothing wrong. I just want to make sure that those negative impacts that it can have on Londoners' self-esteem is also being taken into account.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, the work that the police have been doing on the Stop and Search Charter is really important in that they've tried to make sure that they have reached out, especially to young Black Londoners in that work in devising the Stop and Search Charter, but also the work that we're doing through this research to improve the quality of that interaction will hopefully also make sure that's importantly heard as well. I think we know the disproportionality, as pointed out in this research, is something that needs to be tackled, and that's why we want to make sure that we are doing that.
I mean, if I could just build on your point there, I mean, so for people, we talked a lot about people's trust in the Met, and just to bring it to life with some statistics, which people don't often do, but people who aren't stopped, their general level of trust in the Met is 74%. People who have been stopped but who perceive that as being procedurally just, it's 67%. People who are stopped but don't feel it's been procedurally just, so fair in common parlance, if you like, their trust in the Met is 24%. So that's a gap of 43 percentage points between that, which just shows the importance of actually that interaction when people do have to stop.
Yeah, and I think that's borne out by lived experience. One of the report's authors, Dr. Yijing Li from King's College London, said the modelling revealed clear evidence of unexplained disproportionality in how stop and search powers are used across London. And the report found that improving quality of grounds for stop and search could reduce disproportionality by 11 to 19%. How will MOPAC ensure that the Met improves the quality and objectivity of recorded grounds for stop and search?
Yeah, so now that this data has been published, and it's important to say that we've spoken to the Met a number of times before publishing this data. It's about the Met have said that they will take away the information and look at how they will move forward on it. That's for them about understanding, especially in those 24 wards, what's happening and why that's the case. But for us, it's about continuing to scrutinise on this area. As I've said, we'll be running that data annually to see if it moves, but also this is an area that the London Policing Board has as a key priority, has already had a committee 2 times, and will continue to look at it as an area for scrutiny.
Thank you. And just finally, what role can technology play in improving the kind of quality of evidence needed for stops and search? Obviously, something like live facial recognition has been used a lot and only flags people who've committed offences. Can technology be used to ensure that the quality of stop and search is much higher than what it is currently?
Yes, in short. We know actually using this data, this is machine learning, which has enabled us to process a huge amount of data. As I said, 150,000 stops and search and over 17 million words, is it? So being able to use technology enables us to process this at a higher rate. The Met are also using a tool called Quest to look at how they move forward in improving the quality and oversight of stop and search. So, yes.
I think the other thing you could do, which would be really interesting, is to take body-worn video, do some training in terms of the sort of machine learning around what happens to that, look at what are the key factors around escalation, de-escalation, use that to actually program and code up for the Met, with the Met, what about the quality of the encounter, so that they can do much more of the oversight sort of automatically. And obviously we need a human at the end who can then check if there's any flagged for concern, etc. But it's a different way into looking at this, which I think potentially allows primarily the Met and other forces longer term to have a much better grasp of what is going on and a better understanding of what's happening at scale than has been able to do before, if you could actually do that sort of work.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really interesting report. Some of the things that I picked out of it that were quite interesting were when we talk about proportionality being in balance, it's actually from outcomes of arrest from stop and search. So if you're white or black, you are just as likely to be arrested after your stop and search. So therefore, that shows that when people are being stopped, they're being dealt with fairly, surely, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, and I think, as Kenny said previously, the HMIC report also said that on terms of a just stop, that is seen. However, what the research shows is that the grounds are vaguer. So the research shows that if you're a white Londoner, you're more likely to be stopped and searched because you've said you've admitted something or you've been witnessed, for example,
But that's the reasons
shoplifting.
we're talking about the outcomes, Deputy Mayor. Aren't the outcomes what's important here? You're talking about the reasoning there, but we're talking about the outcomes.
Yes, I mean, I think whilst that's correct, it also is concerning that in 24 areas you can be 48 times more likely to be stop and searched if you're black than if you're white. And I don't think that that's related to the outcomes.
So
you don't think that the arrest rate is important when we look at stop and search and we see that you are as likely to be arrested if you're black or as if you're a white? You don't think that's important?
No, it is obviously important, but also the amount of stop and searches that happen where there is no further action is also important.
So a couple of things. One, that is absolutely an important metric, and we're not saying that isn't. Two, I would say there's quite a lot of nuance in the report, because it does find, for example, that there isn't disproportionality in that side of things. That is obviously a very important matter. But equally, and if you look at some of the modelling here, just one of the really interesting things, if you take Richmond, for example, it is the area which has one of the highest areas of actual disproportionality versus what the model would have estimated. But equally, if you then overlay that with the strength of the grounds for stop and search, the strength of the grounds for stop and search is actually stronger for black Londoners in Richmond than it is for white Londoners, yet their disproportionality levels are beyond what you'd expect. So we're not saying this as an end point, we're saying this is a point which allows us to have much, much more sophisticated conversations with the Met, with the public, with ourselves than has ever been the case before. Part of that absolutely has to be looking at a local level, because the stat you've rightly pulled out there is at a pan-London level, and we're saying that isn't a good enough starting point for us anymore in terms of how you look at this.
Because
sort of
I thought the other interesting thing is that you obviously pull out Richmond there and the importance of looking at the grounds for stops, but then you look at some of the poor performers, i.e. Hackney and Haringey seem to come out. Is it worth overlaying crime and perpetrators in these areas to see? Obviously, Hackney for some time we know has had a massive knife problem, especially within young black boys. Is that not important to the context of that? And
crime data is part of what we looked at in the model. Again, it was 200 factors we looked at. There was crime data. We looked at wider socioeconomic data. We looked at even things like green space and how that sort of.
I'm just, Deputy Mayor, are you not concerned slightly when, like I say, that we're not overlaying the crime on here to look? So, like I say, for example, Hackney, a poor performer, but we know historically some of the issues that have been there, and much to the points that were raised earlier, I'm concerned that a move away from how we're operating puts more people that are at risk of being victims at higher risk.
So, as Kenny just said, crime is a factor and has been.
Crime wasn't a factor. Sorry, the type of crime wasn't a factor in the report, so it didn't overlay the crime in the boroughs.
We can come and
I was talking to the Deputy Mayor. Surely she knows the report. It didn't have crime as a factor.
Crime is a factor.
No, it didn't overlay the crime in the borough.
Do you mean the types of crime?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But it does look at crime overall. I don't know.
No, it doesn't look at crime. It doesn't look at crime in the boroughs. It doesn't talk about the crime that's relevant to those boroughs.
It is one of the factors that was looked at.
No, it's not. So it doesn't overlay the crime in that borough, the types of crime in that borough. It doesn't look at the types of crime in that borough.
The types, yeah. So it's looking at crime overall. But you're asking whether the next part of the research might be to break it down by crime type.
I'm saying it should have included it in this one.
Well, I mean, this is,
because I'd say it's very important, the type of crime that's being committed, and then looking at stop and search. Those things are interlinked. So if we're going to look at the outcomes, I think this is all outcomes-based, which is why I was really pleased to see that the arrest rates are the same. But also, when we're breaking it down by borough, and we see places like, I said, Hackney coming out as top, well, let's look at what is the crime type in Hackney. What are the reasons for stop and search? Why is that important in Hackney? And why is it delivering those outcomes? Surely looking at the type of crime is essential to make these recommendations. How can we act without doing that?
Because what we're primarily looking at is disproportionality. And I know, for example, in Hackney,
you're putting the cart before the horse, and it's going to put people in danger if you don't do the work properly.
Assemblymember Best, could you let the Deputy Mayor answer, please?
The work that we've been doing already in Hackney, having the community scrutiny panel, is a key part of this conversation. Hackney's done a lot of amazing partnership work to look at reduction of knife crime, and that's really important. And the work they've been doing on the community scrutiny panel to look at the use of different forces has improved the community conversations with the police.
I think we're talking at cross purposes on this. We're cleaning up. I hope you look at it in the future. I also hope you look at it more gender specified. So, for example, I'd be really intrigued to look at the difference with women, especially is there a difference between white women and black women, to see how far these issues go and to understand disproportionality, because the report says it's not something we understand. And I think if we look further at that, the types of crime, and if we look, for example, at black women versus white women, we can start to break down what is happening and perfect those outcomes. The final question I wanted to ask, Deputy Mayor, is we've seen in the report that stop and search is down almost 85% since 2009. Does that worry you?
Yeah, it is 2009, it has been down. I mean, part of that, I believe, was Theresa May's big crackdown on stop and search and removal of a piece of legislation in relating to counter-terrorism.
I think what that was trying to do was make stop and search better, Deputy Mayor, make sure people didn't get stopped without good reason, which is exactly what you said you want.
Which is exactly what this research also
but
enables.
We've seen it.
I know,
but even since, sorry, that does not correlate with when the dip happened. Even looking at those powers that Theresa May bring, that does not correlate with how sharply it's dropped.
No, the dip happened
mayor.
primarily inexplicable through the repeal of Section 44 in 2009, which then led to a massive decrease across the whole of the country. So that's right. Then there was a best use of stop and search, which was the reforms brought in by Theresa May as Home Secretary. That's entirely right. In terms of, are we concerned about the fall in stop and search?
I was asking the Deputy Mayor, though, Kenny, sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks. I was just saying, the Deputy Mayor politically, obviously, do we need to rehash? We all know the Mayor promised he was going to say there would be less stop and search. I'm asking the Deputy Mayor now, because we need to know politically the direction. Are you worried about the decline in stop and search?
I think it's really important.
No, it's yes or no. Just to,
no, I'll
the chair wants to go on.
The question.
You can say yes, no, and then give context. But
Assembly Member Best, let the Deputy Mayor answer in the way that she wants to, please.
Can it include a yes or no? She can give context. I'm happy to understand context, but yes or no isn't too much to ask
Assembly Member Best, Deputy Mayor, and then we're moving on.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we recognise that stop and search is a vital tool in reducing things like knife crime and drugs. And that's why we want to make sure that we're working with the Metropolitan Police Service to ensure that they are enacting that in the best possible way. And this research, as you've said, enables them to look at the quality of that stop and search and look at how they can go further to improve that and raise the trust and confidence of all Londoners.
Could you answer my question? Could you answer my question now?
Sorry,
it's yes or no. Stop and search has dropped by 85%. You said you would let the Deputy Mayor answer my question. That wasn't the question. It's yes or no.
I'm moving on.
It's yes
Assembly
or no.
Member Lord Bailey.
Well, can we write to the Deputy Mayor, give us some time to think about it?
You can write to the Deputy Mayor if you want. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
I'm finding this a little bit. My worry, Deputy Mayor, is that all of the reforms have led to a reduction in stop and search. You've talked about a reduction in crime, but remember the first big reaction we had to stop and search was from the Mayor, and we had record levels of knife deaths in London. So that's why I'm keeping on this theme of, are you worried about a reduction in stop and search? Are you worried about, is it focused on that? And in that particular way, what will the Met, when do we expect the Met to implement these recommendations? And do you have any sort of forethought on what the impacts may be? Remember, what I'm particularly worried about is every time we've done something big on stop and search, it's led to a reduction in stop and search. And very shortly after that, we've had a massive spike in knife crime. Under the current Mayor, we've had the two highest years for knife crime deaths in London were under the current Mayor, after he's made it very clear that he was anti-stop and search.
I mean, I think we can reflect on last year where we've had the lowest number of homicides for under 25s in a decade, that the work that we're doing to reduce homicides, moreover, is working. And I would say that stop and search is a vital tool, but it's one tool in an arsenal of things that we're doing to keep young Londoners particularly safe, whether it be the work of the Violence Reduction Unit or the work that we're doing with the police around the Child First approach, all the work that we do for our commission services to keep young Londoners safe, and the opportunities that we provide
but I'm asking you
for young people.
Specifically about stop and search, because this report is largely a good thing. I take to Kenny's point that it gives us an opportunity to have a much more sophisticated conversation about that. The point I'm trying to make, and I want you to address, and only this point, is, are you focused on this not just leading to a drop in stop and search? Are you focused on it being greater quality? Because I'm worried that the Met will just see this and think, well, the Mayor has never been pro stop and search, we will just reduce it more. When do you expect the Met to enact these things, and what are you hoping that will come from this report and their enacting of the recommendations?
Yeah, I think we have to be clear that this is, and I've said previously, that this is not research that we have done without conversations with the Metropolitan Police. This is Metropolitan Police data. We have talked to them throughout the development of this research. So they're already doing some of the things to improve the quality of stop and search. We mentioned previously Quest, we mentioned the Stop and Search Charter. This is about making sure that we're improving the trust and confidence of Londoners and making sure that we have the information to understand what the disproportionality rates are now, and that we can come back to it to look at the work that they are doing to tackle this and improve it.
Thank you. Can I ask you about when the Met reports, will they be looking at the type of crime? So if you look at the Hackney versus Richmond experience, Hackney had a knife crime problem, which would give you in order to overcome, you would expect much more enforcement activity on the street, much of it in the form of stop and search. If you don't concentrate on the crime type, it then puts stop and search in a very different light, doesn't it? So when you look at what you're asking the Met to report on, when they look at these recommendations, will you ask for crime type? Because obviously different types of crime need a different intervention.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Lord Bailey, that we need to make sure that we're data-led in all our interactions. And we know, for example, the work that we do through the VRU really takes those interventions to the places that need it the most. And we can continue to look. I've said that we'll commit to do this work annually, this review annually. We can look at how we can layer the crime types into that. But what I would say is Hackney have moved a long way. We've seen last year reductions across the board on homicides in all areas of London. But I don't want people to leave this chamber thinking that Hackney haven't done a huge amount of work to tackle knife crime.
I fully accept that, and if Assembly Member Wemmer is here, she'd make sure that was said. I accept that, but the point I'm trying to make is Hackney has been called out because of the amount of stops and searches had. Maybe in response to the crime type it was facing, it did exactly the right thing. Who knows? But all I'm asking is that you make sure that is an estimate as well. What type of crime in any given borough are the police dealing with? So does that drive the level? Because the one thing we can agree on, whatever the level is, whatever the level is, the quality has to be best. We can squares that way.
So the crime is part of that model. When we go through it in more detail, if you think we're missing something, that's
but
okay.
Not the type of crime. So that's the point.
So the overall crime levels, which
yeah, but overall crime. If I'm doing burglaries and you're doing stop and search, that doesn't change anything. Whereas if I'm running around with a knife,
I'm actually agreeing
the
with you
police
here,
getting involved is important.
So I'm saying it is in there. Then the second point I'm making about this is that if you actually look at how you look at the quality of the grounds, you can't do that by crime type. You can only do that by the stop and search grounds type. Now we have done that. Now to take your point, if you're looking at a knife crime injury, you would expect to be looking at stops and search for weapons, points and blades, or going equipped, those sort of things. And those are the areas where you actually see bigger gaps in the quality in terms of white people who white Londoners who get stopped have much higher qualities of grounds for those types of activity than black Londoners do. So we do build that in. Clearly you don't think we've built it in enough, so we can meet and go through that. But I want to reassure you that is built into the model.
I want to be very clear. I don't think you build it enough. Looking at overall crime is not useful. And Chair, I just want to echo the Deputy Mayor's point. Parts of London have done great amounts of work to reduce the level of crime. Hackney and Croydon leap to mind. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett. Oh, sorry. Move on to you, Assembly Member. Could we welcome the Year 12 and 13 politics students from West London Free School in Hammersmith and Fulham? Welcome. Okay, Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. Just to pick up on a couple of things that have been said already. So, Deputy Mayor, you spoke a couple of times about the Met being involved in the publication of the report and seeing it and being involved in the development of it. Can you explain what changed? Like, what do you mean by that beyond them providing their data? Were they given a copy of the report before it was published? Like, did they remove any parts of it?
No, they didn't. First of all, I want to make it clear, no, they didn't remove any part of it. No, we've been having, obviously, they shared the data with us, but we also have a meeting with them called the Holborn Group, where we look at data and insights. It's only called the Holborn Group because the first meeting was in Holborn, where we look at what we're looking at in terms of data and insight and oversight and the work that they're doing. As previously stated, I think it's really important that MOPAC has a role of scrutiny and challenge, and I think this research is really important in that, but also that we look at ways that we can move forward on these really important issues. So there's no point us just saying this is a problem.
Yeah, it was more the fact you said they were involved in writing the report, so I was just interrogating whether how much.
No.
Yeah, okay,
we
that's
work
fine.
With King's College London in writing the report.
Just to pause on what you were saying there then around the importance of scrutiny. Kenny, to pick up on something you just said, you said it allows us to have more sophisticated conversations, but this isn't anything new. Like, we've known the disproportionality in stop and search for years, like for decades. And also the Mayor's Drug Commission last year showed another three times more likely black Londoners to be stopped and searched for a drug stop around cannabis, despite use being equal among Londoners. I just find it a bit frustrating that we're saying, oh, this is more sophisticated and more helpful, when we've just, the 30 patterns of harm go into the fact that this is an area that probably needs kind of urgent addressing. And I just find it frustrating that, last year we sat here with them when I questioned the Met around the changes they were going to make from the Drug Commission. They basically said, oh, it's all stuff we've been doing already. I don't think it's really going to change what we're doing. So I just feel like, yes, we're having a conversation, we're all concerned, and we want a more sophisticated conversation, but I don't actually know what difference it's going to make, and we're missing the context of the Met being institutionally racist here.
So what I would say, and this is something that my predecessor shared with me before I started this role, is that it's having this huge data set enables us to have that granular detail, so that we're not talking about kind of possible, what are the other factors. This is about what can the police do in this area to tackle disproportionality, and having the data that enables them to do that. So being able to say, what is the grounds in which, the quality of the grounds in which people are being stopped and searched, what's the difference, we involved many volunteers in that work.
So that's the new part of this data. It shows you that it's the grounds that were the issue. So is that something that we didn't know before this report, that the grounds are the disproportionality?
So I would say there's two really interesting things about the report. One, if we start with the grounds, that's never been done on this scale before, and it's never been broken down by the stop and search type in terms of, and it's never been done with 17 million words, 152,000 stops and searches in that way. That is new. That is something which should help the Met. That is something which should help community groups when looking at their 50/90s. That's really interesting. The second thing, going back to your Dr. Daniels report, which has not really been done before, is Dr. Daniels talks about, when she talks about the Metropolitan Police, stuff which is sort of outside of the Met's control and what they can impact, and stuff which was within their control and what they can impact. Now, the quality of search and search the grounds that are recorded, that is entirely within the Met's gift in terms of what they can control. Then if you look at what we talk about in terms of the levels of disproportionality and the rates, that's why you put in the socio-economic factors, because the model does then estimate that there should be a level of disproportionality, that actually the model estimates black Londoners will be stopped at a higher rate than white Londoners. But it says that even allowing for all those other factors, that there's still 9% or sort of 4,500 stops almost, which the model can't explain as a result. So it allows you to actually start having.
So on the grounds point, do we think that the Met Stop and Search Charter as written addresses this grounds issue? Because you just said then around recording the grounds, because obviously it's not just recording the grounds. We don't think they should be stopping people because the grounds aren't fair. So it's about what is being done about that part of the Met's culture and its institution to address it being a stop in the first place.
Yeah, and that's something that we are looking to talk to them about at all stages of policing. So what does that look like in training? you know, what are the grounds that we should be looking at, and how does this data feed into that, but also the continual review of how that's happening. So the annual review of this data and what we're seeing in terms of grounds should enable us to see whether that's improving or not.
And does the Commissioner take this as urgent? Like, is this being seen as an urgent thing to address? Because obviously when I hear training, it just sounds like it's, you know, like a long term down the line. Like, how serious has the Commissioner taken this within the culture and the way that he speaks to his kind of seniors and the staff around the seriousness of this?
I mean, the Commissioner has, at the last London Policing Board, we went through this alongside the work they're doing on the wider inclusion chart plan that they have, and we had really robust conversation about that. I think the Commissioner has committed to making sure that the Metropolitan Police Service is an anti-racist organisation, and this work is done to support them in doing that.
And has he apologised to Black Londoners about this disproportionality?
Not that I know of, but I think it's important to understand that we now need to do the work with the Metropolitan Police Service to look at this as a conversation about how they improve these interactions. I think that he recognises through the work that they've done on the Stop and Search Charter that there needs to be a reset in the conversation about stop and search.
And then just quickly, Kenny, you mentioned looking at body-worn camera. Obviously, that's something that the community monitoring groups do, and we've heard in this chamber before in one of our investigations that when they flagged concerns about use of force and disproportionality, like grounds for the stop, they haven't had any support from the Met in escalating that. They feel like it just goes to a dead end. So can this reinvigorate some of the community monitoring groups and just the MOPAC support to them and the Met taking their concerns seriously?
Yeah, no, absolutely can. And that is something which we've just recently written out to all our volunteers and to local authorities and others about. And it's something where we do want to, we are, in fact, we're hosting an event on it tomorrow evening here. And that is about getting better representation, looking at more powers. And this, again, is what I said at the start. It's something that Assembly Member Bailey asked me about last time. We said we're very happy to work with you, with local authorities and others to make sure that we get that kind of representation. And these tools and potentially future tools around body-worn are all the things which can potentially be helpful in terms of doing that. But then what we also need to do is make sure that there's a much clearer line back into the Met and much clearer line back into us, so those community groups can hold both us as MOPAC and the Met to account for that, and it is going in and having that impact, and that's something the Met really has committed to through this new work, so I do think that is a good sign.
Great, because, yeah, obviously it sounds like we've got like 30 patterns of harm, this work, the community monitoring groups. We've just got to make sure the Met is responding to all those angles of concern. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we continue, could I ask members to be brief in their questioning and panels brief in your answers as well, please? Assembly Member Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best to follow that request, but we'll see. So when we had a previous meeting of this committee and we had a panel of guests, and 3 out of the 4 panellists agreed with, basically echoed the principle that Kenny mentioned earlier, that yes, stop and search done properly, hugely valuable tool for getting weapons off the street, and that's hopefully, I would have thought, something that we can all agree with as a principle, and therefore the discussion moves on to how we do this effectively and fairly. But the statistic that I've been previously aware of, which I think was a quote from the Commissioner about a year ago, saying that the use of stop and search had halved in the previous 3 years. I hadn't been aware of the bigger fall, which I now am, having seen the briefing, and you know, I thought that was bad enough. But to see a fall of over 80% since 2008-9, I think is absolutely staggering. Now, the bulk of that fall was under the previous mayor, not this one, and under the Conservative government. But what we've seen since the kind of low point, I think they have seen a bit of a divergence between London and the rest of the country. Obviously, from the low point in 2018-19, around at the time, judging by this graph, both sort of increased towards the pandemic. But since the pandemic, in the rest of the country, England and Wales excluding London, there's been an increase in the use of stop and search. In London, there's been a further decrease. So is that a deliberate policy choice that's led to that?
No.
what else could it have been? Why is the rest of the country increasing it, but London going in the opposite direction?
I mean, this is something this is the reason the Commissioner has worked with AC Adelakin to look at the Stop and Search Charter, because he wants to make sure that officers have the confidence to enact Stop and Search correctly. I will say as well that we need to obviously be focused on the outcomes, and as I've said previously, we've seen significant decreases on many crime types: theft from person, robbery, homicides. So one doesn't necessarily beget the other, and as previously mentioned, a major drop in the use of Stop and Search was after the removal of Section 44. So that's really important to consider in this context. But this, as I've said repeatedly, this isn't about us wanting Stop and Search to decrease. We want to make sure that it's being enacted positively and fairly, and that this is a thing about us improving trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police Service.
I welcome the mention of the word outcomes there, because as Assemblymember Best mentioned, one outcome is that the arrest rates are not statistically significantly different. So that seems to be the most important outcome, but there we go. No, I appreciate the findings of the research, and it's very interesting to look at all this. But I guess I'm keen to kind of understand what happens next. And just go back to what I said earlier. Since the pandemic, elsewhere in the country, it's going up. Here in London, it's going down. My concern is that with every time this gets raised as a discussion, and the way that the discussion is framed over these questions of disproportionality rather than the principle of getting weapons off the street and those arrest outcomes, my concern is that this is used as an excuse to reduce Stop and Search, not a mechanism for improving it. Now, you may or may not think that's a fair interpretation, but could you at least understand why it comes across like that?
No, I don't think that that's a fair interpretation, because I've repeatedly said this isn't about reducing Stop and Search. This is about improving Stop and Search and raising the confidence of Londoners. I think, as Assembly Member Small Edwards said, there is real harm in this being enacted badly, and not having the outcomes we all want, which is the crime reductions that we have seen over the last year that we want to continue to build on.
So just a bit of context is that London's numbers might be going down. It still has the fourth highest. We still have the fourth highest rate of Stop and Search in the country after JMP, Merseyside and Cumbria. I think Stop and Search, as Deputy Mayor has said, is an important tool. It's about giving officers the confidence to use it in the right way. We don't want this report to be used in any way which undermines officer confidence. What we are saying is we do think there are tools and learning which can come from this about, one, the quality of the grounds, and two, looking at areas where, well, why is the rate of Stop and Search so disproportionately high when actually the model would estimate and say that it really shouldn't be. That I don't think that's about trying to do down or diminish the importance of it. I think that's about what various politicians have said over the sort of years about having a better understanding of it and making sure it is used effectively but also appropriately.
My final question then, and back to Deputy Mayor, if I may. So if this report and the recommendations within it can be used effectively to improve the way that Stop and Search is conducted, can we expect to see those numbers in London go up and it be a tool that is used more, not just more effectively, but more as a way of getting those weapons off the streets? Or will we continue to see that decline? Because I think that will be the proof of the pudding as to whether or not those previous comments about recognising the value of it as a tool, will we be increasing the usage of it if you can get it right?
I mean, that's what we want to work with the Metropolitan Police Service to understand, is they've laid out their charter. They're now looking at the delivery plan for that charter, and how they are going to move forward and hopefully use this data to improve the quality of those grounds, but improve, most importantly, the crime outcomes for Londoners.
So hopefully we will see an increase in the use of Stop and Search by the end of this mayoral term.
for me, it's not really about whether stop and search goes up. It's about how the crime outcomes are happening. We've seen last year the lowest ever homicide rate. The homicide rate go down for under 25s in a decade. That's what's really important. For me, it's about making sure that, you know, mothers aren't losing their sons and that we have a safer city for all.
Thank you. Very quickly, Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And I would say I agree with outcomes being the focus. I think the outcome that should be focused on is not the amount of stop and search in London, but the amount of murders in London. And we've seen the murder rate in London at the lowest since records began. There's been points made by a couple of Assembly members about the arrest rate being similar between white Londoners stopped and black Londoners stopped, and that potentially being a justification for the huge disproportionality we see in people being stopped. My argument would be that actually the arrest rate being similar is probably an argument in favour of white Londoners being stopped more, and the fact that there is this huge disproportionality in the amount of people stopped who are black and white not being justified if the arrest rate of those being stopped is very similar. There's also been a lot of discussion about crime and knife crime and murders, but also a big grounds for stop and search is drugs. And we know, as Assemblymember Garbutt said, that drug use is very similar between white and black Londoners, and yet the stops are very disproportionate. Do you think this could be a justification for greater stopping of white Londoners, particularly where it comes to drug offences?
I think what's really important, and what we've seen in the data, is that the grounds on which people are stopped and searched are felt to be fair. And the data obviously shows that currently vaguer grounds are used in a lot of areas in London to stop black people. We know through the work that we did, the Mayor's commissioning of the independent review of drugs, that this was something that came through in that report, as, you know, people being stopped on things like the smell of cannabis, and that's something that we have had active conversations with, and we're doing that work through the London Drugs Forum to look at the recommendations of that report. I think overall, and as you rightly said at the beginning, the importance is that we get better outcomes in terms of crime. I think also we want to make sure that we have a police force that serves all Londoners, and that all Londoners feel safe to report to issues, and improving the trust and confidence of Londoners is key to that. And that obviously we know that the confidence rates on the back of a bad stop and search can affect a person profoundly, and therefore they might be less likely to report an incident going forward, and that's what we want to tackle.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And even more quickly, Assembly Member Lord Duval.
Sorry, those arguing for less stop and search and those arguing for more stop and search seem to me have got it all wrong. And if we go back to outcomes of what we need to be doing, but isn't there in that, I've always wrestled with this over many years, the issue of disproportionality around that. And I was a bit shocked hearing one of the earlier comments from some members around disproportionality and issues of that. On the grounds for stopping, it's not just grounds for stopping. If you're a police officer acting in a certain way, you could be drafted into an high crime area doing operations where there's going to be more stop and search. I could be on response where I need to do a stop and search. I could be in a safer neighbourhood team, which might not be operational, but I come across a set of circumstances where it is. Does the report in detail go into that sort of granular detail around that? Because that might point to where some of the issues of disproportionality is. Now, I'm not going to argue that disproportionality is a good thing in some circumstances, but it seems to me it's clearer cut. If I'm in Richmond, if I can use that as a borough, and I've got a high number of black people being stopped and searched as opposed to white people, I think I might have a bit of a problem. I might have a bit of a problem on disproportionality. In terms of other issues of people have said in the past, where we're running operationals in high crime areas or where we're targeting that, then we might see a higher number of people being stopped. But what I don't get is about the outcome bit. Again, so if I can pause a young person from picking up a knife and put it in their pocket, thinking that they may be stopped and searched in an area, that seems to be a good outcome. But I can't measure that because I'm measuring it on outcomes of what I might find. And that's for all those pro-druggy people that say, if only we stopped, we could get these numbers down because we're stopping people because it's just a little bit of cannabis. Actually, the criminality that arises around the drug trade and that little bit of cannabis causes misery and mayhem for families and for people and for victims who get caught up in all those issues. So I have some difficulty when we have these reports that don't take us a little bit further on with that conversation and a little bit more understanding about some of those issues. And again, when people quote ACME, and I think we're quoting ACME a bit unfairly, because it's not just the high crime area, but it's an easy one to latch onto. When you know, in terms of neighbouring boroughs, or I can pick boroughs in the south of London as well, where there are also high crime trends, but we're not seeing the level of activity. Should I be praising that borough for the level of activity in terms of what they're doing to suppress crime? And should I be questioning some of our leaders in other areas about saying, well, actually, you could be doing a little bit more? There's a lot there, I know.
Definitely. I think on the last point, this is why the work that we're doing on the wider operations, so the crime hexagon hotspots, the work that we're doing, whether it be summer nights, winter safe nights, and the work that we're doing around the uplift in crime, police in, for example, Westminster and the West End is important because it shows that what we're doing is data-led. We're looking at where we invest both our understanding, but also working in partnership with local authorities, the police, businesses, and the community, moreover, in a targeted way to reduce crime. I think I just want to clarify on the previous point around drugs. One of the issues is not possession, it is the suspected smell, which is obviously a lot vaguer than possession. And this is something that the research on the vagueness of the ground, it's important to understand because we understood from the data that white people were more likely to be stopped when they had admitted that they had something, where they were visibly seen to be involved in a crime, and then stop and search. Whereas the data shows that the vagueness on black searches was vaguer than that. Someone acting evasively, for example, and that's what we want to tackle.
And can I also sort of similar member develop? We're not going to sit here and pretend that this research answers every single question about stop and search, and we're not going to sit here and pretend that we can't improve this further. And when we come and speak to you all about it, we're very happy to take on board any of your things. I mean, for example, the Holy Grail would be that you actually look at disproportionality against your available population, so the people who are actually on the street at the time versus what's happening versus your census population. We get that. That's virtually impossible. So this is the best that we can do within this, and it's the first time it's ever been done at this sort of scale. Should you be praising people for deterrence? We all know that is a driver of crime. We all know that'll be a driver of whether people carry a weapon, don't carry a weapon, etc., etc. How do you measure that as an outcome? I don't know. Can you ever attribute something like that solely to stop and search versus to some of the wider educational or youth work, or indeed some of the wider improving the economic prospects of people, and it so that actually they don't end up having to go down that road in the first place? Probably not, if you're being entirely candid about it. Do you sort of say, well, when people are in a high crime area, is that factored in, is it not? Well, that would be factored in in fact, and I have looked this up, there are 58 variables related to crime in our model, so and we can go through that. But there's, for example, just being in a high crime area by itself isn't a good enough reason to stop somebody, and that is one of the areas when you look at the quality of grounds, you see black people are much more likely to get well, this is kind of known for weapons, so we'll just stop this person. That doesn't feel right to me. Would you expect to see higher levels of stop and search overall, probably in a high crime area? Yes, you probably would. Would you expect to see that as a justification in itself for a young person walking down the street? Probably not. So that's what I mean about we're not saying this research is the answer in itself, but we are sort of saying those conversations that you want to have, therefore, about, well, I live in Lambeth, so take, say, Lambeth and Southwark have 2 different outcomes, or this, that and the other. Actually, that should be a really good thing for the BCU commander to be able to have that much more sophisticated conversations about what's happening here versus here, and being able to understand that a bit more.
So in terms of age then, around that, because I think on the last spike of knife crime, I thought one of the trends I picked up was older people, not younger people, that were being hurt and murdered through knife crime as a trend, which was an issue. So that would counter the ages of stop and search in certain areas if that's what was following on the back of an aftermath of a knife crime. I mean, just in terms of... No, I'll leave it there, but Chair, maybe that we could compile a list, as the other Assembly member did, of other questions that we might want to ask you in detail, because I think it would be very useful to follow up some aspects of this and how it's taken forward.
We're very happy to do that. And also, as Kenny has said previously, we're happy to go through the data and have a wider briefing as well with members.
Sorry, there was just a very quick one I want to leave with that. So when they talk about technology and we talk about body-worn cameras, and then it talks about using body-worn camera evidence, I thought they were doing that. And I was a bit shocked to read in that, whether it was an interpretation of the report or not, of thinking, well, actually, what were they doing then? Because I thought we were doing that from day one, of looking and reviewing and learning from body-worn camera evidence in terms of stop and search.
So they are doing that both inside the Met with something with their quality of encounter stop and search model, and the supervisors doing that more generally, and also the community monitoring groups are doing that. What I think would be new and novel, if we were able to do this, would be to code up on the basis of a high number of stop and searches and actually be able to automate that, which would then be able to flag potentially some of the ones around interest because of escalation, de-escalation or other practices during a stop, which would then be able to proactively sort of flag some of the videos which they thought warranted deeper inspection by some of the supervisors in the Met or by other people in that regard, so that the people's time and focus is used in the most productive way possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also, so that the committee is aware, because this issue is so important and the research itself, it has been quite innovative, I have asked MOPAC to organise a briefing for the committee. Now, whether that's before the local elections coming up or after that's for, you know, that's for a later decision, but there will be a proper briefing and more detailed questions can be asked about the research and its findings. Thank you very much. We are now moving on to the policing of protests. I'm hoping we can get through this relatively quickly, at which point, if we do have time, we will have a break. So, Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Did the Met consult the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime on its request to ban the Al-Quds March on the 15th of March?
No, the Met didn't consult us. That's a decision for the Home Secretary to take.
No, I know that. You mentioned earlier that MOPAC is scrutiny and challenge. I just wondered. So, yes, I did note that Kenny was nodding at that. But anyway, did they consult the Mayor?
So obviously we get regular updates on operational matters, and yes, we were told that they were looking at this, but this is obviously, as I said previously, a decision for the Home Secretary to take.
Yeah, I know that. So what was the Mayor's view on that ban? Because I didn't catch him commenting on it publicly.
The police force told us that they were concerned about the threat of violence and disorder, and that they were taking that information to the Home Secretary to decide whether the march should be banned. However, I think it's important that the march, there was a static protest that was enabled by the Metropolitan Police Service.
Yeah, we know that. But what was the Mayor's view? Did the Mayor agree with it?
Well, the Mayor obviously understands if the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service is concerned about a high level of violence and disorder, that he has to take the steps that he feels he needs to move forward to talk to the Home Secretary about taking that decision.
Good. And you agreed with that decision too, did you, as Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime?
I think if the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service says that they are so concerned about the level of violence and disorder that they want to talk to the Home Secretary about how they move a march to a static protest, that's understandable, yeah.
Good. I happen to agree with that as well. I'm jolly pleased it was. I mean, there's other things that I think they should do. Do you think they should ban the IRGC?
That would be prescription, which would be a decision for the Home Secretary.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm asking, you are Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. What do you think?
I think it would need to go through a process where the evidence was reviewed and go through a prescription process, in which would
Yeah, but you must be concerned
legally
about this with all these marches. What is your view? What is your view about this?
My view is that it's important in a democracy that we're able to have protests and that we have a system that enables that to happen safely. I think that it's really important that those protests are done in a manner that is peaceful and gets their views across. I believe that on all stances of a protest, but I also think it's important that those involved in those protests are conducting themselves in a peaceful manner.
Yes, which of course we've seen many occasions they don't. They're not conducting themselves in a peaceful manner. I was just wondering what your views were, whether it would help you to keep law and order if the IRGC was banned, Muslim Brotherhood, people like that. What are your views? What would help you make London safer? You're the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. What would make you feel safer? What different measures could the government take that would make it easier to police London?
I think the NIC, we've spoken about this a number of times. I think we've had this year a continuation of the NIC, which is a good thing. We've seen £63 million dedicated through that, which means that we're starting to recognise that policing a capital city with the demands, some protests, some,
so more police
events.
officers, basically more police officers.
Yes.
Yeah, but then the Mayor's reducing the amount of police officers. So how does that add up? If you're asking for more money to make London safer, why are you watching the Metropolitan Police reduce in numbers?
The Mayor has been clear that he's prioritising neighbourhood policing. That's why he's time on time made sure that he's put up the precept and has increased his budget from 19% to 25%, a quarter of the Metropolitan Police Force's budget through that uplift in council tax. He's never shied away from investing in the police because he understands that, and it's why we have continual conversations with government about the importance of funding through things like the NIC.
For time reasons only, for your sake, Chair, I will stop. But I will come back to this because what you say actually doesn't add up.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hall. Assemblymember Cooper.
Coming back to the topic of the discussion, we were offered a private briefing by the Metropolitan Police after the Commissioner's letter had come out so that we could go into some of the details with the senior officers as to why they had made the decision to use the Section 13 banning order. And I just wondered if you could set out what information they gave to MOPAC and to yourself, Deputy Mayor, as to why they felt the Al Quds march met the threshold for a Section 13 banning order for a march where we've had numerous other protests virtually every weekend, regular Palestine Solidarity Campaign led protests that have only been subject to Section 12 and Section 14 conditions about where they meet, where the route might be, etc., etc. What's your understanding about what the difference is between why the first time since 2012 the Section 13 ban on a march was given on this occasion?
So I'd say it's based on two things: the intelligence they had in relation to violence and disorder, but also primarily as well, I think it's understandable given the international context of what's happening with the conflict of in the Middle East, that they felt additionally concerned about that.
So when you say violence and disorder, do you mean from people on the protest or people who might have chosen to counter-protest, or both?
I think that they were obviously aware that there could be a high number of people on the protest, but also that there was a counter-protest planned, and it was about the management of both of those. I think the static protest that did happen, there was 12 arrests on the back of that, but they were able, I think, quite successfully through conversations with both of the organisers of both of the protests pre the static demonstration to enable it to go forward and used to be expressed in the safest way possible.
Yes, my understanding is that the static demonstration and the counter demonstration did both go ahead, but they were on different sides of the River Thames?
Yes.
And nowhere near Trafalgar Square, which was obviously hosting St Patrick's Day celebrations, which was one of the questions that I put to the officers about making sure that, because I don't think that would have made a good mix, because Al Quds have tried to use Trafalgar Square before.
Well, I mean, I think, Assembly Member Cooper, that your point really talks to why this issue is so important in London as a capital city. At any time, we can have 4 or 5 different significant events going on at once, which goes to my previous point about the importance of us getting the NIC so that the police can enable the whole of the city to be able to be safe.
Do you think there's something a bit strange about only being able to ban a march?
Right, sorry about that. I don't know what's happened there. We need to have a break anyway, but I will get the rest of it going as soon as. But thank you everyone for watching. I'll get the rest of this bit live a bit later this afternoon, and we'll cut through their lunch break and continue it on a bit later, probably about 3 o'clock, maybe 4 o'clock. All right. Thank you everyone for watching so far. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll catch you all a bit later.